Well, the coronavirus pandemic is wreaking havoc on China's economy. Industrial production has contracted for the first time in 3 decades. For January and February, it shrank 13.5%. A Bloomberg poll of analysts had predicted just a 3% drop. Retail sales also plummeted from a year earlier, 20% down as consumers avoided crowded places like shopping malls and restaurants. That's 5 times worse than what analysts had predicted. But the Chinese government believes the impact of all this is short-term. All right, so let's join Ryan Morhard, lead for global health security at the World Economic Forum. Ryan, today we saw coordinated action by central banks, including the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan. Is the scale of the pandemic and the economic fallout too big for any one stakeholder to address?
Hi, good evening. I think you've said it just perfectly. That's exactly what we're hearing. That given the scale of this emergency, that responding to it and flattening the curve, reducing the length of this pandemic and reducing the magnitude of its disruption is going to require cooperation at a scale and a speed that we haven't seen before, and by everyone, by governments, by business, and certainly even by individuals.
Ryan, we've been fending off global recession for the better part of the past year. How big is the risk now of a global recession in the coming weeks or months?
Well, I'm afraid I can't predict sort of how big the risk is of a recession. But I think what everyone is looking to see is, and we talked about, and we've just talked about the cutting interest rates, but I think the rate that everyone is concerned about is seeing a reduced rate of transmission of this virus. And once people start to feel safe and that their livelihoods are protected along with their lives, I think we'll start to see a bit more of a resilient economy. We'll start to see us return back to normal. But that's really what's on everybody's mind.
Ryan, let me get your take on the issue of pandemic bonds, because there's been some chatter about this one, especially since the Ebola outbreak and when pandemic bonds didn't pay out anything. They're under fire now for not handing out funds quickly enough to developing economies. What do you make of this? Are these bonds a little too, too late? In a sense, we've already met several of the criteria necessary, the number of countries, the number of deaths involved. So what's going on with those bonds?
Yeah, that's right, and certainly there has been the chatter, and I think we should also keep in mind that the World Bank has just recently historically mobilized several billion dollars, I believe $12 billion, to support the response. But one of the things that the pandemic bonds that the World Bank has really highlights in my mind is really how little we were doing as an international community over the past several years to prepare for a pandemic. And in a way, the fact that the World Bank did organize around the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility and those bonds only illustrates how little was done. And it's certainly the case that those bonds haven't delivered the way everyone would have wanted to. But it was one thing that was attempted before this pandemic hit. And frankly, I think it's clear now, as a community, we should have been doing a whole lot more long before that.
All right, Ryan, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us this evening. We've been speaking to Ryan Morhard, their lead for global health security at the World Economic Forum.